patience was not a virtue in the classic world. It didn't become a virtue really in any positive way until the time of Christ. In fact, the nature of the word patience and the root it shares with passio is an indicator of how important patience is almost strictly to the Christian tradition. So this is a really important part of talking about patience. Secular patience and Christian patience. Secular patience, as early as the time of Augustine, maybe Tertullian, was all about yourself. You're talking about yourself. What's the gain that I could get from myself? So you could talk about patience as maybe hunting, a patience of a hunter. Or contemporary times, secular patience might be a pitcher waiting to make the pickoff on first base. Examples of things like that. Christian patience is very different, and Christian patience, modeled after Christ and the humility of Christ, is focused on other people. And that distinction is the primary distinction between secular patience and Christian patience. If there's a common denominator of secular patience and Christian patience, is that secular patience has a denominator of death, if you will, that everything that is served by secular patience will one day die or disappear, and that everything is served by Christian patience will persevere, and it'll be part of the reward of the kingdom of God is that there's no time limit. We're not living according to time interval, even though we're doing that sort of thing even at the moment. That's the biggest distinction, I think, between secular and Christian patience, and they can be easily interchanged, but they're not the same thing. One more thing I'd like to say is that Christian patience is a virtue, and secular patience is something that we can learn, but we don't necessarily assimilate. And so you can coach someone, for example, take that example of the baseball player throwing to first base, trying to pick off a runner. That's something you can teach someone to do over a period of time, but it doesn't necessarily change the character of the pitcher. But if you're practicing Christian patience in terms of your interaction with other human beings, members of the congregation, people outside of the church, other traditions, there you have to change yourself. And that's part of what makes it a virtue. In other words, your character will change and improve as you learn to be a more patient person after the example of Christ. And so when we start talking about patience, we're talking about trying to hear the other person, to understand what the other person whose point of view is. Patience, Christian patience, gives the opportunity to suffer or hurt or disappointment, to be vulnerable, quite frankly, is more important to patience than suffering is. And it gives us an opportunity to have a timeline that extends out into the future infinitely to God's time and opens up the possibility of reconciliation. Secular patience can be about physical things. You can be patient waiting for a gumball to fall out of a machine if you want to talk about it in those kinds of terms. And that would be patience. And that's the kind of thing we teach our children for sure. But Christian patience is almost always about our relationship with other people. In fact, I'd have a hard time thinking of an occasion where you wouldn't be a patient Christian that didn't involve other people. When I talk about patience, Christian patience, I'm talking about, as I said, vulnerability. Waiting is certainly a part of it. And you can find yourself waiting as a patient, Christian patient versus a secular patient in very different ways. A secular patient person might wait in line at the airport just because they want to take advantage of the situation. You can imagine a patient Christian, however, waiting in line and taking this opportunity to reflect on the needs and concerns of other people and how we find ourselves in this situation in the first place. And so it's a very different approach. One's time-bound and one is not time-bound, and secular patience is very much time-bound.